In this video, we're going to solve by factoring. But before we do that, I want to pause and kind of discuss something really important. And I always like to discuss this in my algebra classes. We are, for the first time, doing algebra in this chapter. So I like to kind of talk about what algebra is. So algebra actually comes from the Arabic word aljabar. And it translates into the reunion or the reuniting of broken parts or pieces. It was a medical term, and it was this idea that you could bring two pieces back together, join them back together. Now, here's how that relates to solving. When we talk about a 3 times x, and I just have 3x sitting in space, that doesn't mean anything. It means that I'm going to take a number and I'm going to multiply that unknown number x by 3. But because I don't know what x is, it's kind of meaningless until somebody tells me what x is. Therefore, this has meaning when I unite it with another piece of information. In other words, if I set it equal to something else, like 12, or I could even get more exciting than that. I could say, well, this is 12x plus 36, right? I reunite it with some other piece that doesn't mean anything until I know what x is. I can now actually solve this and figure out what x is by bringing these two separate pieces together, this 3x, and then, joining it with the 12x plus 36, we're able to do something useful with it, solving. So algebra is all about solving. And what we do always gears us up to solve equations. So this section, we're going to focus on using factoring to help us solve. Before we do that, we have to learn something called the zero product rule. So if I told you that A times B equals 0, if I told you that two numbers, they multiply to be 0, you know one of those numbers has to be 0. Either A equals 0 or B equals 0. One or the other have to be true. Maybe they both equal 0, but at least one of them has to be 0 in order for that statement to be true. So what's powerful about it is if you have two things and they're multiplied and equal 0, it tells me information about those two numbers. So let's try to utilize that in a problem. I'm looking at this. I have 5x squared minus 10x equals 0. And I'd like to use the zero product property. So in order to write this as a product, I'm going to factor, because remember, factoring means to rewrite something as multiplication. So I'd like to factor this, and I'm always going to check for GCF. And I do have a GCF. I have a GCF of 5x. So if I factor out 5x, I'm left with x minus 2. And that doesn't factor any further. X minus 2, like that's not a difference of squares or anything. So I'm done. That's factored. But now I can use the zero product property, because according to that, that must mean that 5x must be 0. I wanted that to be green, but my computer is not fast enough. I want that to be 0 or this to be 0. So either 5x equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0, or both. So if 5x equals 0, I can actually solve this for x by dividing both sides by 5. And that's going to give me x equals 0. Over here, I could solve it for x by adding 2 to both sides. So x equals 2. And what that means is if I plug in 0 for x or 2 for x, I'm going to get 0 in that equation up there. It's going to work. On the left side, I'll end up with a 0. So if I plug this back in, and I'll just show you how you could check your answer, because we can always check when we're solving something. If I did 5 times 0 squared minus 10 times 0, that's definitely going to equal 0, right? 0 equals 0. Or if I do 5 times 2 squared minus 10 times 2. Okay, so 2 squared is 4, and 5 times 4 is 20, and 10 times 2 is 20. Okay, I get 0 here also. So it works. Both numbers check out. If I plug them in, I get 0, and that's the solution. They're both solutions to this equation. So let's try another problem. So this one, I have a y squared minus 9. Now I don't have a GCF. I do have two terms. They are a difference of squares because 9 is 3 squared, and then there's a subtraction, and y is squared. So I could factor this as y minus 3 times y plus 3. Of course, the order doesn't matter. I could put plus 3 and then minus 3. That the way they're written doesn't matter. But now I have two things that are multiplying to be 0. So this times this must equal 0, which means that y minus 3 can equal 0, or y plus 3 can equal 0. And if I add 3 to both sides, I'm getting y equals 3 over here. I'm like squeezing it in. Sorry, I didn't give myself very much space. On this one, if I subtract 3 from both sides, I'm getting y equals negative 3. Awesome. All right, let's try another one here. So this one, again, I like to check for GCF. There isn't one, but 3 terms, I'm going to factor using the X method. So at the top of the X will be 10 times negative 3, which is negative 30. Bottom of the X is negative 13. So two numbers that multiply to be negative 30, but add to be negative 13. Now, initially, my thought was 10 and 3, but that's not going to work because in order for 10 and 3 to add up to be negative 13, they both have to be negative, and that doesn't multiply to be a negative 30. So actually, it's 15 and 2, and the 15 needs to be negative. That'll multiply to be a negative 30, but add to be negative 13. All right, so let's factor this. 10x squared minus 15x plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so I'm going to factor this. And in the first group, I could factor out a 5x, and that leaves me with 2x minus 3. Second group, I can't factor out anything, so I can factor out 1. I can always do that, which leaves me with 2x minus 3, so that's my blob. 2x minus 3 times 5x plus 1, and that's equal to 0. Okay, so there's my two things that I have multiplied to equal 0, so I'm going to set both of these equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 equals 0, and 5x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so for this one, I'll add the 3, and then divide by 2. So I'll just leave that as 3 halves. I don't need to change that to a proper mixed number or anything like that. That's fine. Over here, I minus 1 from both sides, and I get 5x equals negative 1. Divide by 5, and I'll just leave it as negative 1/5. And there's my two numbers. Okay, so once you kind of see that you're just really factoring, okay, the only way it can get any trickier is like this. So what makes this trickier is it's not equal to 0. And all the other ones were equal to 0. So that's what we need to do first. We need to get it equal to 0. My computer's like a little slow when I select the color and I start writing. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract the two things on the right side. I'm going to move them to the left side. So I'm going to minus the 14x squared, and I'm going to add the 24x to both sides. I'm not going to show the full step because it's kind of not a lot of space. So minus 14x squared plus 24x, and now that's equal to 0. Okay, so now I'm going to factor this. So first thing I'm going to do, check for GCF. And I do, I have a GCF. 2 goes into all 3 of those numbers, and they all have an x in common. So I'm going to factor out a 2 and an x, and I'd be left with x squared minus 7x plus 6. All right, now I'm going to factor what's inside the parentheses using the x method since I have 3 terms. And for the moment, I'm just going to ignore the 2x and the 0. I'm just going to focus on factoring, and then I'll bring it all together again. Okay, so at the top of the x would be 6. Bottom of the x is negative 7. So 2 numbers that multiply to be positive 6, but add to be negative 7, that would be negative 6 and negative 1. So this is going to be x squared minus 6x minus 1x plus 6. I'm just going to ignore the 2x and the 0 for right now. I'm just going to factor this thing here in the parentheses, just focusing on that. Okay, so let me group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. So out of the first group, I could factor out an x, and that leaves me with x minus 6. Second group, a negative and just a 1. Again, I have nothing else I can do. And that's going to change this to x minus 6. So that's my blob, x minus 6 times x minus 1. Okay, now I'm going to bring down the 2x again, the GCF of 2x, and I'm going to go ahead and just set it back equal to 0 again now that I'm done factoring it. Okay, so on this one, I actually have 3 things. This, oops, didn't change color again. This piece right here, this piece right here, and this piece right there. So 3 things multiply to be 0. So I'm going to set all 3 of them equal to 0. Let's see how much space I gave myself. Oh, cool. I gave myself enough space. All right. So 2x equal to 0, x minus 6 equal to 0, x minus 1 equal to 0. All right. So over here, I'll divide by 2, and that gives me 0. Over here, I'm going to add 6, which gives me x equals 6. And here I'm going to add 1, which gives me x equals 1. All right. Okay, so for this last example, it's already factored. However, it's not equal to 0. And in order for the 0 product rule to work, it has to be equal to 0. It literally has 0 in the title. So it being equal to negative 9 isn't going to work. Therefore, we actually have to multiply this out. The left side, we're going to have to FOIL, and then we're going to have to get it equal to 0. All right, so let's FOIL. I'm going to multiply the x, distribute the x in. So that's going to be x squared plus 3x. And then that's going to be negative 7x minus 21, all equal to negative 9. All right, so these 2 middle terms, the 3x and the minus 7x, combine to be 4x. And then to get it equal to 0, I'm going to add 9 to the 21, since those are the like terms. And that's going to be 12 equal to 0. All right, so I'm going to factor that. I'm going to use the x method. It doesn't have a GCF. So let's go ahead and multiply. Let's see, 1 times negative 12 is negative 12. So 2 numbers multiply to be negative 12, but add to being negative 4, negative 6, and positive 2. Oops, started to write negative. Okay, so this is going to be x squared minus 6x plus 2x minus 12. And I'll just bring down the equal to 0. So let's group this now. So in the first group, I can factor out an x, and I'm left with x minus 6. Second group, 2, and I'm left with x minus 6. So this is going to be x minus 6 for my blob times x plus 2 equals to 0. So I'm going to set x minus 6 equal to 0 and x plus 2 equal to 0 and solve them. So adding 6 to both sides will give me x equals 6 over here. And minusing 2 from both sides will give me x equals negative 2 for the second one.